Hello, my name is James Bowden, and thank you for tuning in here to this Near East Observers video. Over the last 48 hours, we have seen some very remarkable events taking place in Lebanon, and there have been a lot of news organizations and a lot of other websites that have been covering a lot of the breaking aspects of this as well as the technical aspects of what has been taking place. And so I definitely refer you to those websites for technical information and for deconstruction of this event along the lines of the technological implications that will be surfacing from this. And I want to touch on that to a degree, also touch on more of the political issues that are involved here, as well as the military, because obviously there have been a lot of comments about that as well. And my hope is to try to provide a little bit greater context and a little bit more understanding as to where we see this going at Near East Observers. One of the bigger things that we have been dealing with over the last year in this conflict was that beginning in last October of 2023, Yoav Gallant was wanting to direct Israel's initial response towards Hezbollah and towards pushing Hezbollah off of the southern border or the southern border of Lebanon, northern border of Israel. And this has long been a very personal objective of his. And so it has been a very interesting thing to watch him going through this process of having to delay getting to the northern front over the course of this year. And I know that back in January, February, March, uh, the Lebanese front became very hot, became very focused again. There were a lot of the same questions and criticisms of the plan raised at that time, and it was delayed. And I do believe that Gallant was not happy and not satisfied with that delay. Of course, during that time, Israel has been limited in what it can do because of the weather conditions and also the military conditions down in Gaza. Gaza remains a very big focus of this war, and rightfully so. But also the issue about the West Bank. The West Bank, ever since January, Near East Observers has been saying this constitutes the real second front of the Israel Hamas war. And Israel was spreading itself very thin with its security services as well as the military in both areas. And so we've gone through a year of different types of delays and different types of questions as to whether it would happen. And it has constantly been thrown back in the media, hey, we're going to be doing this, only for it to recede. And even we at Near East Observers were beginning to be a bit cautious about reporting and saying whether anything was going to happen or not, because Israel had been constantly putting this up, and we didn't want to be a boy who cried wolf. And there is a bit of strategy behind Israel's constantly keeping it before the news cameras. That way, Hezbollah never really got the opportunity to feel totally secure and totally able to be confident about, hey, is this happening? Is it not happening? And so it's very surprising starting to see in July that Gallant and Netanyahu were having breakdowns in communication and in the relationship over the Lebanese front and going in there. And then the surprising accusation by Netanyahu that Gallant did not wish to go up there when we know. And it has been long in the public record that Gallant has basically lived and breathed the Northern Front. And I think that he definitely took that very deeply and very personally, as well as the possibility of being replaced during the war and at such a critical phase. We are approaching 1 year. And to add another war aim, it's very surprising. I've not seen anything like that. I study warfare on a regular basis. I am a PhD student in combat studies, and the addition of a war aim so late in the game definitely feels unusual, and definitely uh, feels like they are running out of justifications in the South and also on the West Bank, and so wanted to go ahead and renew the conflict, and to do so by adding this further aim. And we know that, and it's been reported, the 98th Division was pulled out of Gaza and transferred to the north. But again, these are things that we keep on seeing. And so it's never really quite clear as to what is taking place, given the amount of disinformation that typically is filtered through social media sources in order to continually confuse the situation. And now we have seen this incredible attack take place. Now, in the midst of all of this, definitely uh, Hezbollah has been firing missiles. Most of them have been 2.5 to 5 mile range anti tank guided missiles, even some ballistic missiles like the Burk gun, which have a very long distance. They have a long distance capability, but were often fired very short into the Galilee region. And so Hezbollah was definitely keeping their fighting very limited to the north. We had a brief breakdown of that where it was also fighting along the coastline with drones, but then that quickly dried up and changed. And Israel has been in a continual process of degrading over the period of this year, degrading Hezbollah's missile capability. We have watched as Israel has uh, hit them repeatedly and launched a lot of different attacks. And so, whatever amount of missiles they started with has definitely decreased and had to be restocked by Iran. And that, as you know, is something that we have talked about as a likelihood and a likely reason why Iran did not respond with a full state due to the Ismail Haniyeh. So it all starts to come together. So we want to say that we believe, and we have stated since January, that we felt like we were in a limited war situation between Israel and Hezbollah already, and that the pressure, the amount of strikes, the type of strikes was slowly being increased over increments in order to get the war started, but without a clear and definite moment, without that across the border launch. And then now we're in the war. It was kind of a situation where you'd find yourself fighting and you didn't even realize that it had actually begun. So there have been some comments in the news talking about, is this an attack on Hezbollah? Is it isolated, or is this a part of a war? Is it a part of war effort? And I think those divisions right now, those careful slicings of things is rather inappropriate because that's really something that historians are better at dealing with and understanding when did a war actually begin, especially in this kind of circumstance. But also we're just kind of living in the now. And we have seen, and again, the Middle East is one of those regions where, because of this kind of surprise event, we never say never. So we never know exactly what Israel is thinking. And let's go back historically and let's realize that sometimes Israeli leaders have taken matters into their own hands. Very few people know and realize that Ariel Sharon launched the Lebanon war on his own initiative. He was across the border, he was going into Lebanon when Menachem Begin kind of woke up and turned on the TV and found out that Israel was invading Lebanon. And he was screaming at the top of his lungs But as usual with Israeli leadership, obviously they could not show any disagreement, and Begin was not going to pull Sharon back. So he found some cameras and said, "Attaboy, we're fully behind everything that's going on." And yes, this was completely planned. While he is privately calling Ariel Sharon and chastising him and yelling at him, screaming, uh, "How could you have done this on your own initiative?" So the Israeli security network and its tie-ins with its politics and with the defense industry, as well as the actual defense community, tends to produce some very surprise moments. And that is why we based our belief, and where we base our belief, that maybe this was done on Gallant's own initiative, and that he took this precipitative step in order to blunt the possibility of him being replaced and being perceived as soft on Hezbollah. And I think that it has now committed Israel to a greater engagement with Hezbollah. And of course, we saw, again, as I said earlier, that they had declared Hezbollah and the northern border as another war aim, returning settlers to and residents to the northern border. So Gallant definitely had the cover of that new war aim. So where are we going to go from here? I'm glad you asked that question. I think right now we are still in a period of waiting and watching. Some of the more immediate problems and things to resolve are going to be for uh, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. Some of their neighboring countries are going to have to consider how safe their hardware, how safe their electronics are. Has Israel uh, done this to other countries and they don't know it yet? Has Egypt received electronic devices that are sabotaged? Has Jordan received them? Has Syria received them? I was talking with a client earlier, a colleague, and I brought up the fact that when I was in Mongolia, I went into a few shops when I first started shopping for cell phones and realized that some of the cell phones that they had, I mean, many of them in some of these private shops, not the official vendors, which I eventually went to, but the unofficial vendors were selling a lot of stolen cell phones and pagers and other devices that had come from different countries where people had had their cell phone pickpocketed and sold for cash. So, have some of these devices found their way into Syria? Have they found their way into Jordan or Egypt? I think that Israel has largely been lucky and gotten kind of a lucky break in as much as that somebody in these other countries did not get hurt or injured in the process of taking this or launching this attack. But these other countries are definitely now going to be critically examining, I think, a lot of the inventory that comes into their countries. And it also speaks to, so it speaks of economic and supply chain vulnerability, also security vulnerability. And we may see many of the countries begin to tighten their policies as regards Israel. Jordan has probably the tightest, closest relationship with Israel at the moment. And I do believe that they are going to, and I think they're already showing signs of drifting away from Israel, and that is just going to continue to increase. I think that the pressure to get with the rest of the Arab community in the Middle East is going to eventually get to the point that Abdullah is not going to be able to really ignore it, and that he is going to have to start to pivot towards the Arab community and take things a little bit harder with Israel. I do believe that, like the situation that happened at the Allenby crossing or the King Hussein Bridge, could definitely have been prevented. And I think that it was partly allowed to happen in order to reawaken Israel. And but don't read, I don't want this to be read into anything like some grand conspiracy. I don't think there was any grand conspiracy, but this is not something that we have seen for a very long time. And the people exiting Jordan and going into Israel have to be examined, and would have to pass some kind of border control on their end. And so, if this person was able to somehow successfully smuggle the weapon in, still there was some allowance, and I'm not sure how far up that goes or how very minor low level, but to even see that kind of thing beginning to emerge from the direction of Jordan, and now they've got uh, Israel demonstrating a very scary, very unnerving capability to kill people at just the push of a button from hundreds of, dozens of miles away, definitely undermines a lot of confidence and suggests that Israel is willing to take this kind of action even without warning. So, and I don't want to get too far ahead of the news and too far ahead of the events. Will we see a reaction by Hezbollah? Absolutely. And in some ways, I'm kind of speaking in summary of what I've been posting on LinkedIn, but yes, we are going to see a response. But right now, Hezbollah is licking its wounds. It is trying to get reorganized. It's trying to figure out where they are at. Many people in different layers of their ranks and administration are obviously injured and suffering greatly. And that needs to be addressed. And Hezbollah will likely start launching their longer range ballistic missiles towards Israel. Uh, I don't foresee a cross border action going south at this point, but again, I'm not ruling it out. It's unlikely, but it could happen. Uh, there is the possibility that Israel will also try to go across the border to the north within the next 48 hours. We know last week or early this week, we reported on NEO on LinkedIn that Hezbollah had called for residents on their side of the border to leave their homes and the villages because they had noticed some recent changes in Israeli activity. And so that could also presage an Israeli invasion, a ground offensive. Now, I have always maintained that likely the Israelis are only going to be able to push about 2 to 5 miles into Lebanese territory, and that would help stave off and relieve the pressure of these short range missiles that the empty houses and buildings have been enduring over the last year. But they're still going to have to deal with the long range missiles, which Hezbollah would have to resort to in order to hit Israel. One thing that I want to address is that we don't see this as terrorism, and we understand the Arab world's reaction to this. We understand that there have been civilians hit in this action. Children impacted, sons and daughters, maybe wives, spouses, people who are not directly involved. It appears that even some doctors who may not have had a direct Hezbollah affiliation were hurt in this action, and that is definitely tragic. And there is a lot of very genuine sympathy for the civilians who have been caught up in this moment, and we have maintained that. And we have been very consistent in this position, even when it comes to Gaza and the West Bank. But we see it as a part of a military action. We have been very consistent in this position. that terrorism cannot be conducted against a military or an offensive entity. It's just as we say, when we hear about a Hezbollah attack on Israel or a Hamas attack on Israel, we don't call it terrorism because these attacks are launched with weapons against a military entity. Uh, there were military forces attacked on October 7th. That is not terrorism. What happened between Jordan with the lone gunman who went across the border and attacked the border guards, that was not terrorism. That was an act of war, asymmetric war, but an act of war because it was against government targets. And so we're just really trying to be consistent here. And we do believe that even though civilians were harmed, it definitely is not terrorism. And there's a bookshelf to my left, your right, where I have numerous books on history and warfare. And unfortunately, in every conflict, in every war, no matter how well it is fought and no matter how good the forces are, there's never not going to be a civilian who suffers. There's not going to ever be a non combatant who doesn't get hurt in the process. Uh, we've got books on Japan, and of course on the Middle East, and a number of other just very general books on warfare. And in every single one of those, uh, civilians have suffered along with the military in those general strikes. And we try to sanitize it, we try to make it better, uh, try to reduce those problems, Michael Walls. But there's no way to ever entirely eliminate that possibility. Conflict on a broad scale or even a local scale is always going to involve a certain number of people who are not supposed to be involved. That is not a justification for it, but it does happen to be life experience. And certainly we hope that those who are impacted by this event, who were not supposed to be directly impacted by it, will have a speedy and and really good recovery in this. But we do want to say that we don't see it as an act of terrorism. But and again, if Hezbollah were to attack a military structure, well, that's not terrorism. And we just want to be very clear about where we draw those lines. Is it something that raises fear? Absolutely. And that fear, I believe, is going to work against Israel's interests. Because again, I do believe that uh, the nations surrounding Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, are just continually reminded of how vulnerable they are and what a new Israel they are dealing with. This is an Israel unchained. And I just have to keep emphasizing it because all of the local press continues to raise the specter of did America know? Did America give permission? America is not the absolute controller of Israel. Israel is a sovereign nation. They are completely capable of making their own decisions, and they will make all of these security decisions regardless of whether the United States approves or not. It is the same misunderstanding that Westerners see Iran and Hezbollah as one and the same, and they are not one and the same. They are separate entities. They have independent agendas and ideas. They do more times than not agree, but they do sometimes disagree, and they don't always follow one another's lead. And so, in that, just as we know that there's not that firm of a relationship or that deep control that Iran has over Hezbollah, we also know that the United States does not have control over Israel. And Israel, certainly in the course of this war, has been completely unchained. and has totally disregarded what the United States has been saying and trying to do in ending this conflict and trying to minimize civilian casualties. So, that alone should say is that we are not dealing with an Israel that got the green light or got permission to do this. Um, we do believe that they just, acted alone. And that is a reality that these governments have to deal with and may frighten them into taking actions that Israel has not anticipated and is not totally prepared for. And again, I don't want to get ahead in the news cycle. And I am not here for intelligence. I don't have an intelligence background. My background is history. My background is writing history and also military studies. And so, just going on that, there are ways to look at things and see where they might be going. But we're dealing with a new Israel in many ways, a new Netanyahu. And where he's going to take this conflict, no one can be 100% sure. But I do believe that we will see changes in that relationship in the region very shortly. Whether this will result in open conflict is also unclear. Syria right now is still involved in their civil war. They could fight against Israel and maybe do so in concert with Hezbollah. We've not seen anything from the Jordanians as far as their military, and unfortunately, because of the number of bilateral relationships, there are some concerns. I mean, the United States has bilateral relations with Lebanon and supplied Lebanon with military equipment. And Lebanon has wanted more military equipment, but because of the relationship that the United States has with Israel, has been unable to provide Lebanon with all of the military resources which would make that military strong enough that Lebanon has no more need for Hezbollah. So, a lot of complex relationships and issues which prevent any side from moving and acting unilaterally, except for Israel, in such a way that most benefits them. But I do think that eventually they're going to get to a point where they decide that their need for security and sovereignty is probably much greater than that which the United States is providing with them. And so, in that moment, we'll start to choose some different tactics and maneuvers. The first state that I would see that would act against Israel is not Jordan or Egypt, but would be Syria. And then it would be up to Egypt or Jordan to decide which one wanted to go next. I think Jordan would be the last country to go against Israel, just simply because of the multilateralism that we have to try to disrupt that kind of scenario. Uh, I was asked earlier, what do I foresee anything about Saudi Arabia? I really don't see anything happening from Saudi Arabia. They're kind of exhausted from the war that they fought with Yemen from 2015 up until about 2021. So I don't see them as being ready to just, jump right into another combat scenario. And I don't foresee the Persian Gulf as wanting to jump into another conflict as well. So it may be a limited combat situation, probably very much like 73 or even 67. But I think, again, that the last state to join in would be Jordan. Iraq could support with some military forces, but those would have to transit through Syria. So again, we're kind of going back to 67 or 73. Well, I think I've talked for quite a while, covered quite a few things. There might be a few more things that you would like to know, and if so, please leave some comments or any comments. Comment on something that you liked, comment on something you didn't like, or feel free to ask some questions, and I will be happy to answer them in a follow up video. Thank you very much. Again, my name is James Bowden. This has been a Near East Observers video.